Hey guys, it's Dan here. Welcome back, and we're continuing our Unit 4. And I'm going to talk a little bit of theory for you today. So hopefully you've had a bit of success going through that chord progression. It is tough, okay? So do be kind to yourself, take it easy. There's some really challenging little chord movements in there, but it's such a beautiful progression, isn't it? That it's so worth putting that time in to try and get that down. You'll hear that all over the blues world from anyone from Freddie King, Peter Green, modern blues players, Joe Bonamassa, even soul stuff, Al Green. It's just everywhere, that style of progression. So it's well worth learning it. And in this lesson, I'm just going to talk about the theory, because there's some stuff that crops up in this progression that I think needs to be absolutely covered, so that we're really taking a big step beyond that kind of 1-4-5 here in a blues. So I want to cover the concepts in this and how then you might use them in your own playing. So pick up the guitar and let's get started. Just a quick one, guys, before we carry on, if you haven't already, please go over to the website where you can find access to the full course, including the interactive tab, the write-ups, the backing tracks, all the fretboard diagrams, the entire thing, the way it should be viewed. Head on over there via the link in the description. All right, so the big focus behind this progression is using something called a secondary dominant chord, okay? It's a massive thing, and it's something that basically gives you this kind of portal from one point to another, kind of a pivot point through a progression. The whole thing is fundamentally in the key of D major, okay? If you kind of look at the progression, you've got a D, this F sharp, and then you've got the B, then it goes to a G, a D, an A, an E. Most of these notes are in the key of D major. So we can kind of rest easy that fundamentally the key signature here will be D major. If you look at the notes of D major, you've got a D, an E, an F sharp, a G, an A, a B, then you've got that C sharp, and then you've got the D again. All of those notes appear. D, F sharp, B, C sharp, D, D, G, G sharp we'll talk about in a bit, D, B, E, A, D, A. All of those core root notes of those chords are in that D major scale. So it's very much based upon the key of D major, which is good news. However, we do very clearly stray away from the natural harmonization of these chords. And a lot of that in this instance comes down to either secondary dominant chords or creating a deliberate tension using some kind of like diminished chord, okay? So if I walk you through the chords one by one, the D is obviously the natural starting block of the key. It's D major, first chord of the key. Now the next chord along is actually this F sharp 7. Now if I harmonize this naturally to the D major scale, this should actually be an F sharp minor. Does that sound familiar to you? Let's go. That sounds like a kind of pop song, right? Because that's the natural harmonized, if you just harmonize F sharp within the key of the D major scale, the notes you'd end up are the 3 notes of the F sharp minor chord. Okay. However, we're using F sharp dominant. Why? How come we can do that? And this is the secondary dominant principle. We take the fundamental chord and we change it to a dominant 7th. Because what we want to do is we want to create an extra pull to the next chord along. And that next chord along is actually, this acts then, I should say, as the 5th to the B. Okay? So the secondary dominant is the idea of simply taking the chord as it's naturally harmonized, turning it into a dominant 7th chord so that it becomes the 5th chord of our progression. So i.e. the 5 to the 1. In this case, that 1's going to be a minor 1, okay, so the B minor. Or it could have been the 5 to the 1. Okay. It's just kind of building upon what's already there. So there's already an F sharp chord of some kind, turning it to dominant. That therefore becomes the 5th chord and therefore pulls us towards So although we're going to go to that B minor anyway, and it sits beautifully within the key, absolutely fine, it pulls towards it even harder. It creates a real resolve almost when I hit that B minor chord. So if you ever listen to the difference between the two, if it was a naturally harmonized progression, F sharp minor, still sounds great. Okay? If I do it the way I've done it just now with the dominant, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1. That B minor has a real resolve to it, a true resolve to it, because we've gone from a 5 to a 1. And the F sharp isn't that jarring, really, because we're really only shifting, one note in there, really. We're just kind of altering the chords slightly to fit this current agenda. And as we know with blues anyway, the more dominant chords, the better. This is what the whole thing is built upon, this kind of tension and release, okay? So this is the core concept of secondary dominant, okay? And something we're going to get a chance to practice a lot in this particular track. So we've done that. So we've done there. We've gone to the third as a secondary dominant, and then hit the root. It's now a new kind of root note, right? But then we're going to move again. So we've got this. Okay. So what's going on there? This is basically just a movement that's taking us to another secondary dominant, okay? So we're going from the B, then I'm using this C sharp diminished 7. Now, the diminished 7 really acts as a tension chord, tension, okay? Again, pulling from within the core key itself, so we've got this kind of B to C sharp, that's very much within the key. But to create more tension that resolves to that D, I'm gonna chuck that diminished 7th on there. Diminished 7th works great, guys. Diminished 7th, anytime you're moving in a progression like that, for example, going, moving from the minor to the natural major, which is what's happening here, you can chuck that diminished chord in between. Equally, those diminished chords work super well when you're going from a 1 to a 4 or 4 to a 1 or something like that, just because it creates tension. So if I'm going from the G back to the D, I can create that kind of tension chord, which pulls me back to the D nicely, okay? So again, this is very much all about, everything here is about tension and release, that kind of response, okay? So in this case, in this first case of the diminished chord, we're very much using it as like a bass movement. Okay, so if you harmonize that, we've got B minor, we've got a C sharp diminished, and then we've got the D, which is exactly what's happening. So it's just a movement, which makes it sound like it's rising. We're rising up. Okay, and trust me, you just need to learn these movements. I'm not saying you can go ahead and start creating your own movements. Just learn this one. So anytime you're on a kind of 6th chord, so this is a 6. So let's say I'll do it in F sharp, and I'm going to the 1 of the A. You can chuck that in there. It's going to sound fantastic. Okay, so that then takes us to the D, and then we do a secondary dominant on that. So we change it from the D major to a D7, which if you think about it, if I play the D dominant 7 here, that now becomes the 5 chord, which resolves to the 1, which is G. So we're very much using it again to pull us to that G, to make it really feel like we're moving into another part of the jam track. That G has some kind of resolve to it, doesn't it? So let's just listen to that so far. Secondary dominant, B minor, diminished 7th pulling us to the D, secondary dominant, 5 to 1 of the G. Then I'm going to do another diminished chord here, and this one's a nice little trick, right? Anytime you're doing a dominant chord, if you literally just raise the root note by 1 semitone, just look there, right? Look at that chord there. Ignore the G in the bass. That's the G dominant 7th chord, isn't it? Obviously, we've initially got the G in the bass. Then we raise the G to G sharp. Again, just creating tension that pulls us towards that D. So tension and release. Again, diminished chords, tension, release, release. D. Okay. And then again, we're going to use secondary dominant, because at this point we could go to that B minor, which is the real harmonized version. But by making it a dominant chord, we're again using a secondary dominant, which is going to pull us, if that's a 5 chord, then the 1 is E. Okay, think about it. So 5 down to the E. We know that the B is the 5th in E. Okay, right? So I'm just thinking of a nice way to kind of demonstrate that for you. So B, E, right? So the 5th is the 5 chord of E. B is the 5 chord of E, which pulls us to that E major. So suddenly we're bringing in a chord that really isn't in the key of D major. Again, in D major, that would definitely be an E minor chord. But because I've used this secondary dominant, that really makes it easy to go to the E as a major, okay, because it resolves really beautifully. Then I'm going to go from that 5 chord to the A. I think that's a 5 to a 1. Kind of acts like a secondary dominant as well. And then from that secondary dominant to the D, because we're going from 5 to 1. So we're going from 5 to 1, 5 to 1, and then we're going to come back to the A, as that's the 5 chord in the overall key of D, isn't it? Which will bring us really neatly back to the start. Whew, okay. Secondary dominance. It's an absolute minefield. It's a beautiful thing, okay? If you listen to jazz, you're going to hear secondary dominance all the time. If you listen to Stevie Wonder, you're going to hear secondary dominance. If you're listening to this kind of stuff, secondary dominance. It's just a super useful and practical thing that you can use to kind of move yourself around, okay? So for example, if you're playing a progression, you know, maybe a pop progression or something like that, which maybe has a G to an A minor in it, try turning that A minor into an A dominant, and then that can take you to the D. Okay. So you can go from this. Do you see how now that's suddenly, that fit, I mean, it works. It's an absolutely, my ears are going, okay, yeah, I like it. But of course, it's way out of the natural key of the G major. You know, because there's no dominant in there, and it's pulling towards that D. So it's a super cool topic. It's really, really fun, something you can maybe start to apply. But I think at this point, the first thing to do is just work with it in this track. Just be aware of it in this track, okay? And because all the secondary dominants we're doing are fundamentally using the chords, the kind of root notes of the scale, so an A because it's in the D major scale, we're still sticking predominantly to that key. We never really change key. We just kind of move around it a little bit. So if this is our key center here, rather than just sticking within this key center all the time, we kind of move around it a little bit, but we are hovering around it. I guess a nice analogy is thinking of the key center as the sun, and normally I guess we're kind of rotating around it as Mercury, right? So we're really close to that sun. We're really close there. We're not going far. We're just going around that nice orbit of the sun. And when we start to do secondary dominance, maybe we push it back a few. We're now Venus for a little bit, rotating further from the sun, and then we come back to Mercury and so on. And I'm going to say that analogy has probably come from the fact that my son is obsessed with the solar system right now, so I'm very aware of that. But hopefully that does help a little bit. It's just moving a little bit further away and then coming back in, but we always have that tonal center of the sun, which in this case is the D major. Okay, that's why fundamentally when it comes to the soloing, which is what we're going to do next, you're going to be working with D major and of course D blues. All right, that's it for this lesson. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to check out the next lesson, you will be able to find it here. If you want to start from the beginning of the playlist, you can find that here. Massive appreciation. Please do like and share this content with all of your guitar friends. I'll see you next time.